So hi everybody, welcome to our Governance Made Easy webinar titled, Are You Getting Not-for-Profit Governance Right? With our very special guest, Anna Fitzgibbons from the Breakthrough Office, and then on panel, Stephen Bowman and Gordon Shaw. So welcome to you all. Today's session is in association with the Breakthrough Office, and we're really pleased to be host to their market launch of a really new service, which we're very excited about. But Anna will talk to you a little bit more about that later on. My name's Sean McDonald, and I will be your moderator for the next 40 odd minutes. And firstly, thank you for attending. We really appreciate the effort you've made to be here for our live webinar event. And during the session, if you have any questions for our panel members or Anna, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or wherever your toolbar is. We'll be answering these during our session, and we'll try to get through as many of these as we have time for. So if you'd like to use the chat as well, feel free. Finally, if you stay through till the end, which we hope you will do, and as is customary for our webinars, we have a special treat for you. By answering our really quick 1-minute survey at the end of the webinar, you'll go into the draw to win our beautiful gift hamper worth over $400. Now, for those who don't know much about BoardPro, we are a board software provider, or sometimes called a board portal, and we serve around 25,000 users around the world. We enable organizations to prepare for and run their board meetings more effectively with, you guessed it, clever software, with less time and deliver more impact and value for the organization. And as much as we are a board software provider, part of our wider mission is to make the fundamentals of governance free and easy to implement for all organizations, especially those with resource constraints. So rather than introducing my team, I will hand over to Stephen and he can introduce himself, followed by Gordon.
Hi all, Steve Bowman from Conscious Governance, coming to you from Melbourne, very cold Australia at the moment. Looking forward to our conversation today. I started out life in the non-profit sector very, very, very many years ago and have seen it develop hugely over the last couple of decades. So really looking forward to this being led by Anna. Gordon.
Thank you, Stephen. Kia ora, everyone. I'm dialing in from Mapua, which is at the top of the South Island of New Zealand. So quite wintry here today as well, but the sun's shining. A little bit about me. I'm an independent director. I work with a company called Grounded Governance. In my board roles, I serve on various entities across New Zealand, both in the commercial sector and the community organisation space. I'm a chartered member of the Institute of Directors and really looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have today. So thank you very much. Anna, over to you.
Amazing. I am so excited to get to be speaking with you all today on not-for-profit governance. I will continue and introduce myself in just a moment. Sean, did you have any other items to discuss before you hand over to myself?
No, all over to you.
Great. Well, I am going to go ahead and share my screen. And we'll dive into today's discussion. So as I said, I am extremely privileged to meet with you today to discuss not-for-profit governance. Before we do begin, I would like to first acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners, to their elders past and present, and to their cultures throughout Australia. I recognise the First Nations people's custodianship over deep time and connections to lands, waters, and communities. So before we discuss your key personnel today, I would like to first introduce myself further. I am an executive at the Breakthrough Office, an organisation that works solely in the not-for-profit space. We have a phrase on our website that I think best sums up who we are. The Breakthrough Office was established from a passion to make a difference in the world. Accounting, HR, payroll, and governance are just what we're good at. This phrase has been adopted as my personal mission in the work that I do in the not-for-profit space. I'm extremely passionate about using my skills in governance and compliance to relieve the administrative burden from my clients. And I believe that in supporting organizations to achieve their breakthrough, their organizations will also see breakthrough. So today I am going to be speaking with you about your key personnel and the functions they should each be fulfilling. I know this is quite a lengthy and weighty topic, so I apologize for not being able to deep dive into these areas today. I do note that some of the items that I am covering are fundamentals of governance, and you may have potentially heard these before. However, I do encourage you to engage with this webinar, and I do hope the items that I cover spark questions and conversations with your core team around effective delegation to ensure we are each achieving our position description, with the flow-on effect being that we are achieving the purpose of our not-for-profit. So I think before we discuss any governance topic, our question should be why? Why is understanding key roles integral for not-for-profit governance? I don't ever want governance and compliance to become stagnant buzzwords we use without there being a real purpose or reason. So I have on my screen here a quote from the Commissioner's column around the work that not-for-profits are doing in this space. I want us all to focus on these last 6 words: practices essential for long-term success. Our practices in this space are foundational functions. They create long-term viability of the organisation. They are ensuring we are operating from a legal and ethical framework, and they guide our key personnel to know what their functions are. But moreover, they ensure we are using our organisation's resources to meet our ultimate purpose as not-for-profits. So whenever I am discussing governance and compliance, the first step is to always discuss who our key regulatory bodies or key players are. In knowing the who, we can then find what our responsibilities are. I note that I am Australian-based, so I am so grateful for Gordon today and his expertise in the New Zealand not-for-profit landscape. So I do encourage each of you from other countries to engage with your legislation, as well as guidance from your not-for-profit regulators. However, just a quick summation for our Australian participants. I have on the screen here 3 organisations that I think are particularly pertinent to this conversation we're going to be having today. So firstly, our ACNC, who oversee all not-for-profit organisations that are registered as such. We'll be discussing their governance standards today as guidance points, and I strongly recommend for you to download these standards and use them as a foundation for your governance and compliance. We have ASIC, and they oversee companies in Australia registered under the Corporations Act. For not-for-profits in Australia, this is generally companies limited by guarantee. And then we have our state regulators, and this is important for associations and other incorporated entities under state legislation. Today, I'm going to be focusing on our ACNC standards, as this is reflected in our Corporations Act and state-based legislation as well. However, if you have any questions throughout this webinar, feel free to pop the questions in the chat and we can dive into them further. Okay, so let's dive into it. We're going to start off by discussing our role as the board. So as we know, in a not-for-profit organisation, the board plays a crucial role in steering the organisation towards a sustainable future. This is achieved by adopting sound ethical and legal governance and financial management policies, as well as ensuring we have adequate resources to advance our mission. So what are our primary responsibilities as a board? So firstly, determining our mission and purpose. The board is responsible for articulating our mission, purpose, and goals. Ensuring that our mission is clear and reflects the core purpose of the organisation is fundamental to our success. A way to achieve this is through actively participating in strategic planning and evaluating the organisation's direction in response to changing environments and to achieve your core purpose. Effective planning is key to adapting and thriving in the not-for-profit sector to ensure we stay relevant and impactful. Stephen and Gordon, I would love to invite you into this conversation. Can you share some examples of how vital a strong mission and purpose is?
I'll kick off first on this one. The whole notion of mission and purpose is the highest level of strategic oversight that a board can have, and most boards do this atrociously. So I was just doing a strategic plan facilitation on the weekend, and we were having a look at the vision statement of this particular organisation that happened to be a dentistry organisation, and they immediately wanted to get into wordsmithing of their vision. And I said, no, what we've got to do is to see whether or not our vision provides us with the focus that we need to be able to actually have the conversations that we need to have. And the key point that came out from that is that an understanding that the only good vision or mission is one that is being constantly used in everything. And if it's not being constantly used, then it's not a good vision. So, don't feel that you've got to get into the wordsmithing. I'd rather see how we're using this in everything that we're doing, through the agenda, through our conversations, through shaping up board reporting. And then we know it's a good vision or a mission or a purpose, doesn't matter what you call it, because we use it in everything. And this is the first thing that comes through. One of the things that non-profits are really, really good at, that corporates aren't as good at, is actually understanding our vision or our mission or our purpose, whatever it's called, and then using it. The really good ones use it in everything. Most of the other organisations sort of have it and refer to it every now and then, but they're not using it. So the key point in this is, if you've got a vision statement, use it. Use it in everything, and particularly in helping shape board conversations. Gordon?
Yeah, very good points, Stephen. And it's quite interesting from a New Zealand perspective right now, is we have a burning platform in the community organisation, not-for-profit sector, with a requirement for all of the organisations to re-register as incorporated societies. So the mission and purpose, but linked to the board, and the purpose of the board is really important, because a lot of organisations are now going, what does the board do? What are we meant to be doing? How connected are we to management, or is management and the board side by side? And so are we looking at sort of first principle approaches, which is essentially, if we think about a board cycle, it's kind of like, the plan, do, check, and act cycle, but linked to what's going on in the not-for-profit sector, and Stephen has sort of touched on it, is a wider overarching approach to the mission and purpose of the organisation, but more importantly, the board and how that operates as a separate team as well.
And if I can just expand a little bit on what we were saying before, you've got the up on the screen there, you've got mission and purpose, you've got financial management reserves, and then the legal duties. I think that's probably the right sequence, because budgets and financial management should never dictate what it is that we are going to be doing to achieve our vision or our purpose. If we've said something is so important to do, the money's out there, whether it's in our budget or someone else's budget. But what should be driving where we're going is what is our vision, and how we're actually using that to have these strategic, innovative conversations. Can we do this ourselves? If not, who can we do it with?
Yeah.
Should we be doing it? We know it needs to be done. Can we support other organisations to do this, whatever this is? And this whole notion of starting from the very top, of being very clear, not only about what our vision is, but using it in everything, including how we shape our budgets.
Yeah,
Anna,
definitely.
over to you.
No, thank you so much for your insights. And I think it's really interesting that both of you shared around that aspect of conversations in terms of mission and purpose. I think that oftentimes mission can be a stagnant item that we establish at the start of our organization, and we don't necessarily review it on an ongoing basis. In your experience, Gordon, do you think that there is a certain frequency that we should be coming back to our mission and purpose and re-establishing where that is up to?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. It's interesting too. You talk about some of those plans can sort of sit on a shelf gathering dust.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think you're seeing a theme in the early discussion here. It's around the board and its accountability to have a discussion,
Yes.
to review. If you said to me, how often should they be doing that? Most people would say, yeah, that's a yearly process. But it depends. There's a piece of string and we go, it depends on the organisation, on the size, on the complexity of things. But the key point we probably all of us will make is that it should be reviewed, because there are some organisations that have or have a mission and vision that was created 15 years ago, hasn't been looked at, because in the not-for-profit area, we get people deeply involved in running the business as well as being governors. So sometimes the strategic side of the role gets forgotten about a little bit. And this kind of comes back to, from a Kiwi perspective, is that being on a board or a committee of a community organisation or a not-for-profit is really no different to a commercial entity. Some of the different processes might be different. Some of the business might be different. But as a board and as governors, the same rules apply.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much to both of you for your insight on that area. I think it's also important that as we are talking about our mission and purpose, we're talking about the executive supervision and support. This is an aspect that we will dive into a little bit further on our next slide in particular. But I do just want to note while we are having this conversation that the board generally are selecting, supporting, and reviewing the performance of the Chief Executive Officer. And they are responsible in doing that aspect, in providing the direction for the organisation and by establishing overall policy to assist that executive team. The board's responsibility in doing so includes monitoring the organisation's programs and services to ensure they are consistent with our mission and effectively supporting our goals. And this is essential for maintaining the integrity and impact of our work.
Anna, can I jump in there? Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm going to be a little controversial with some of these things. Most boards don't know how to performance manage their CEO. They do a really not particularly good jobs because no one sitting around that board table has any experience in doing it. So one of the suggestions that we strongly make is to either through your governance committee or your people nominations and remuneration committee or whoever it might be, get them up to speed in how to actually do this.
Yeah.
The best way to lose a good CEO is to mess up their performance management and the performance framework. So get some skills or some training or bring someone onto your committee who's not a director. Bring someone onto your governance or your PC&R committee who's actually really good at high performance management, because that by itself can have a fundamental impact on the quality and the decision-making capacity of the board or the committee of management. So, little hint, if you don't have the skills or the experience of how to do high performance management at the CEO level, bring them in or learn how to do it.
Yeah,
Gordon?
definitely.
Totally agree.
Great, thank you, Stephen. And yes, I think that is something that will be really integral to today's discussion around if you don't necessarily have those skills, there are a lot of resources out there for you to continue to learn and upskill both yourself and your board as a whole. And just following on from that conversation, I think that when we are crossing over into discussions around the executive team, that monitoring aspect is from a strategic lens, ensuring that we don't cross over into facilitating, which would more so be that operational function. And again, this is something that we are going to discuss further today as well. I think that obviously on our slide, our next point is around our financial management and reserves. And this is a real passion area of mine. Working at the Breakthrough office, we have a lot of accountants on my team. So I am quite often in our financial management discussions. But I think it's important to note that one of our foremost responsibilities as board members is ensuring adequate resources for not-for-profits to fulfill their mission. This will involve being proactive and innovative in our approaches to a variety of areas. However, specifically, we must ensure the prudent use of our organisation's assets and funds for the fulfilment of its mission. This encompasses implementing financial controls and mechanisms to maintain transparency and accountability. Now, as I said earlier, I do work with a lot of accountants, so this is part of my everyday discussions. However, as my team regularly reminds me, financial management is not limited to accounting roles. In fact, we have duties to act with reasonable care and diligence and in good faith. And there's a further clause in our Australian legislation around solvency resolutions, and it's essential that as board members we're aware of that. So essentially, the board has a duty to stop the company from continuing to trade when it can't pay its debts. I encourage each of you to actively participate in your financial discussions of board meetings, ask questions to clarify, upskill your knowledge, and ensure that you are acting with reasonable care, skill, and diligence. If this is a space that you and your board are encountering issues in, there are organisations that provide this training and upskilling, and these conversations and continued financial literacy training should also form part of your board meetings. I do think,
Anna,
yes.
Sorry. So one of the things I found in this area, one of the great tips and tricks of the trade, and it's not often done, is for the board to have a very clear retained earnings policy or a reserves policy.
Yes.
Many organisations actually have, good reserves, but they've got no idea what they're there for. So having a look to see whether or not, or developing up a really good reserves policy, we need to have X amount in reserves. So we will always work towards that. But we also don't want to have any more than X amount in reserves, because then if we have too much, then we're actually not being able to make a greater contribution to creating the difference that our organisation was set up to make. So having very clear guidelines around, here's what we should have, whatever that might be, 20% buffer or something, but also we don't want, an extra X amount of dollars in our reserves that we are just sitting on because we like seeing dollars accumulate.
Yeah.
We need to have a policy around that. And there's many good examples of reserves policies, but it's a great way of getting the board and the directors focused on, we're not here to make money. That's the easy part. We're here to understand how we're going to use that to create the difference that we want to make.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, following on from our previous discussion on mission, in creating those policies, they shouldn't be stagnant policies. We want to be very intentional that they're usable policies and easy to implement and understand. And again, if this is a space that you or your board aren't confident in, there are a lot of resources out there for policy templates, but also for upskilling and training in this area. I think that as board members, obviously, we are all so passionate about the not-for-profit space and the work that our organisation is doing in the community, but also ensuring that we are using our position to continue to learn and use our position to grow the organisation is essential for its long-term success. So it is, as you can tell from all three of us, a big passion area of ours is upskilling board members and equipping them to fulfill their responsibilities. Gordon, did you have any points to add in that space?
Probably just one, Anna, from a NZ perspective.
Yes, thank you.
Our Institute of Directors has a 4-pillar approach, and one of the pillars is called effective compliance. And what we're talking about here is essentially a wider compliance sort of discussion. And it's always critically important for not-for-profits and community organisations to understand that even though they might be not-for-profit or in the community, they still have a compliance component of what they do. So, for example, one of the not-for-profits that I'm involved in today, we signed off our annual accounts. Those annual accounts have to be submitted through the company's office to the Incorporated Societies area, and we are held to account on those. So there's some accountability that goes with the responsibility of the role that you have in your community organisation. So the key point here is, as you've said, is there's plenty of opportunities to learn and upskill, and hopefully people attending the webinar today or watching it later in replay will get a feel for that there's an opportunity to, one, learn more about your roles, but also make your organisation more effective in managing its compliance.
Yes, definitely. And I think that, again, it isn't that once a year review when we are submitting those reports. It's about our ongoing work in this space to build really robust systems and frameworks. Perfect. Sean, do we have a couple questions coming through in the chat?
We have one. I think, Stephen, you were responding to it. Do you want to read that one out, Steve?
There's one. Do we have examples of good reserves policy? And the answer is, by tomorrow you will, and Board Pro can send them out. I'll send a couple of really good examples that I've got from other organisations. The other questions there is around performance management of the CEO. What are our thoughts on engaging an external consultant to support the board with CEO performance review? My response to that is twofold. Number one is get someone on your committee who's responsible for this, who's actually got some experience. It could be someone from another non-profit who's done it, or it could be someone who does that in their day job, whatever it might be. But the only time you want to get an external consultant involved is if they are also able to train your board up on how to do this rather than being reliant on an external consultant. Many organisations find that every 4 or 5 years, they might bring in an external just to see that they're on track with high performance management systems and processes that are fit for purpose for the organisation. But the key thing would be to really upskill and start to find out what do we need to do as a board to do this really well, because it is one of the most important things that you can put in place.
Yes, definitely. Perfect. Such interesting questions already. Rounding out our discussions on the board, that last aspect around our legal duties, I do just want to note for all of us on the webinar today that as directors, we are ultimately responsible for adherence to legal standards and ethical norms. Vigilance in following legal guidelines and maintaining public trust is imperative for our credibility and operational success. Again, I know that as board members in the not-for-profit space, we are all extremely passionate about what the work our organisation is undertaking. However, it is also essential that we are creating that operational and long-term success through ensuring legal and ethical integrity. I think that a key aspect of this is periodically and collectively reviewing standards to ensure we are using them as foundational pillars. I know that quite often when we are onboarding new directors, we have in our onboarding pack the list of your key director responsibilities, your key duties under legislation. However, I do encourage you to be doing that throughout the year and throughout your life cycle as a board member. Keep reviewing what your standards are and also implement them as part of your conversations and the framework for your board discussions and decisions. Before we do round out our discussions on the board, Gordon, Stephen, did you have any other aspects that you would like to discuss together?
One of the things with legal duties is most organisations, most people see them as really boring and we've got to comply with them. They can lead to the most fascinating conversations. We had one just yesterday where the conversation about your duty of care to act as an ordinary prudent person would in a similar set of circumstances, and then the impact of an excessively large board pack of 800 pages. How can we possibly undertake our duty of care when we're expected to read this huge board pack? And the information, the conversation that was led through that was about, well, how can we reduce our board pack so we can focus on the stuff that we really have to focus on rather than this huge wad of papers, because someone thought it was a good idea to provide more information without realising that our duty of care and our duty of loyalty and our duty of obedience, they're all about what are the key things that we need to know about that is worthy of our time as a board. So understanding the legal duties is one element. The next element is then making them live. Yeah. Conflict of interest, for example, if you're in a federated body, and many of you will be or have been or will be into the future, the biggest issue with any federated body is the notion of conflict of interest. You cannot represent. You can only be a director. And understanding the legal responsibility and putting that into plain English at the start of most meetings is a really good way of managing federated structures. Gordon?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. For me, it's just sort of rounding out the discussion on the board is just thinking about that your board is a team and the board has a life cycle, and there is a healthy life cycle, and we don't have time to go into the full life cycle. But in the community organisation and not-for-profit sector, there can be a bit of a balance between the degree of work the board has to do, and because a lot of not-for-profits don't have a large amount of staff to allocate work to. So it's striking that balance of so the board work, your time on the board, and having really courageous conversations about the terms of boards, because what we see in New Zealand is a number of not-for-profit or community organisations where the boards haven't been refreshed for some time. They might have one or two board members change from time to time. But if you ask them, have they done a skills matrix? Have they got a succession plan? You get blank looks. So this is something that, you know, all boards, whether you're not-for-profit, commercial, whatever you're doing from a board perspective, you really need to be thinking about the future, the skills matrix, the people around the table, and having a plan, because that's been a real theme already this afternoon, about how you approach that.
Yes, definitely. I think it is that balance, as you said, of looking at our current competencies, but also that future planning and ensuring that in balancing both aspects that our not-for-profit is thriving and making a meaningful impact. I do want to pause here and thank any board members on this webinar today. I want to acknowledge the time, work, and passion you pour into this space, and it does not go unnoticed. So thank you to each of you. We are going to jump into our executive team discussion now. So I know that we've already had some really valuable insights in this space, but to give a bit of an overview, some key roles and titles you might have in our exec team are your Chief Executive Officer, Chief Financial Officer, and other management titles. Our positions in this space are geared towards operational, essentially taking the strategic plans, goals, and vision of the board and putting it in place for day-to-day running. Now, I will just flag a couple key duties before we jump into our panel discussion. So in this space, you may be undertaking the operational leadership, strategy implementation, financial oversight and processing, and remembering this is a key aspect where reporting into the board, stakeholder engagement, operational decision-making, and other administrative tasks. I know that there is some overlay between strategic and operational. So to draw that clear distinction, I like to label our board as the visionaries and our executive team as the doers. So our board provides directions, goals, questions, tasks, and other mechanisms that are at that strategic level. And our executive takes those plans, goals, and strategies and implements them in our day-to-day. Now, I know that, Stephen, you've already touched on this aspect slightly, but Gordon, I would love your insight on how the board can be managing these functions without going into that operational level.
Yeah, and thanks, Anna. And it is a challenge for all community organisation, not-for-profits. We are trying to strike the balance between governance and management,
yes,
and keeping keeping in our lanes essentially. Can be more challenging because board members are asked to do work that technically you could classify as operational, but delegated to the board because they don't have the executive. So if we look at the number of community organisations that are registered in New Zealand, a number of them are very, very small, where they might only have an executive officer that's doing day-to-day operational work, and that person might only be a part-time person. So that sort of comes back to if we think about the discussion we had previously around effective compliance, is really understanding some of the rules of engagement or the board charter or the terms of engagement for a board to understand the role that they have to play, and understanding essentially which hat they have on at a particular point in time. So there is a challenge there in that space, but Stephen, I'd be interested in your views in this as well.
Yeah, look, in many cases as a CEO, and I've certainly been in this space, I've had to have all those positions in that one, as an executive officer or a CEO. So many of you who are on this call have either moved up through the ranks, or you've joined an organisation where it was small enough where you took on all those roles. And the key thing is to make sure that you've got your committees in place to actually help support the various elements. So, for example, if you're going to put a finance committee in place, then and you don't have a chief financial officer, make sure you've got someone on that committee who's good at it, who's actually come from your local accounting firm, perhaps. If you're in smaller rural or regional areas, then often you'll find that if you actually go to one of the accounting firms in your rural or regional area and ask them for someone, they'll give them to you. Why? Because they get experience. And so you can actually start to build up your subcommittees. Many not-for-profits believe that their board subcommittee structure should only be made up of directors. No, they should be made up of people that you can call upon to actually be part of that committee, because they're not directors. So looking at this from that perspective, the executive team, even if you're small enough where you don't have an executive team, you still need to understand that you've got mechanisms in place to help you. Your committee structure is one of the most powerful. You can get insights from that committee structure, and you can bring in outside people to sit on those committees because they're not directors. The other thing is that you can start to look at making sure that the governance side of things for the board isn't overtaken by running the operations of the organisation. So there's, again, a large range of things you can do in that space. Anna?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also important as part of these conversations to talk about the policy management side. I know that one document in particular that is an essential item that I recommend for every organization to have is a delegation policy. I think that that is a very easy to implement policy so that we can be distinguishing between what the role of our board is, what the role of our exec team, where our committee sits in with that, and in particular where people are job sharing to know what they're doing under the exec team banner and what they're doing under the board or committee banner. So I would really recommend for each of you today to make sure you have a delegation policy and make sure that it is up to date. That is an area that very quickly as your organization can grow or change, it can become outdated. So make sure that you are continuing reviewing it and ensuring it's fit for purpose. Perfect. So the final role we will be discussing today is our corporate secretary. I have been very intentional in naming this slide. I know that some of you may be using the title company secretary for this role, but I wanted to ensure that our not-for-profits that are associations or incorporated entities do not overlook this position or dismiss it as not being pertinent to your organization. Further, in my experience, I think oftentimes this role can be underestimated or minimized to just minute taking. And while minutes are an essential function of this role, a corp sec is much more. I do just want to touch on for a moment for our Australian participants that in our Corporations Act, companies limited by guarantee are required to have at least 3 directors and 1 secretary. Now, I just want to pause here for a moment. Our regulatory authorities, in recognising the essential work that the corporate secretary undertakes, made it one of 2 mandatory positions named in legislation. So what is our corporate secretary? Acting as the backbone of a company's administrative framework, the corporate secretary provides the seamless operation of governance processes and compliance with legal standards. I'm going to take a closer look at the 3 aspects on the screen today, starting off with our record keeping and compliance. So one of our fundamental duties is to ensure the company adheres to all legal and regulatory requirements. This involves meticulous record keeping, including maintaining minutes of board meetings, documenting member communications, and managing filings with regulatory bodies. This responsibility extends to ensuring that your records and lodgements are up to date with your key bodies. And ensuring that your deadlines and due dates are built into your governance framework. Again, although the corporate secretary is responsible for this record keeping and compliance, it also should be a broader board discussion to know what your key duties are under your relevant government regulators and registration bodies. Stephen, Gordon, do you have any tips for our record keeping and compliance space?
Gordon.
Well, we're on a webinar sponsored by BoardPro, so a number of not-for-profits that I'm involved in are using BoardPro as a portal to ensure effective compliance. But interestingly, this role, of corporate secretary in the New Zealand legislation, the changes to the Incorporated Societies Act, they're being very specific about roles and duties of officers of a society now, and bringing back the role of treasurer, and clearly defining some of the operations of a society that have to be undertaken now. So very similar, not the same as the Australian legislation, but beefing up our society's legislation so that there's more accountability. And they definitely have now defined the role of an officer of an incorporated society once you re-register under the new legislation here in New Zealand. So record keeping and compliance tends to sit with a treasurer's role here in New Zealand, but specifically there will be a committee member or a board member that is accountable for that.
Yes, definitely. Stephen, did you have an item to add?
Yeah, look, again, a very practical tip is that when you appoint someone as the corporate secretary, as part of their job description, which means you really should have a job description for them, develop up a position description for it. But as part of that, also insists that they actually either do some reading or, even better, do a half-day or a one-day course on what it means to be a corporate secretary. Most people aren't born with these skills and don't necessarily know what it means. So again, there's some really good free stuff out there. There's some good half-day or one-day courses on what it means to be a really good corporate secretary. And as part of your commitment to upskilling your directors, actually have this as part of the budget process, or get it sponsored, or however you want to do it, but just provide them with the guidance about, here are the things you should be reading, here's the course that we'd like you to go on. Because once you've got a corporate secretary who knows what they're doing and they do a really good job, they become a fantastic conduit between the chief executive and the board. And more often these days, we're finding that in organisations that have staff, that corporate secretary role is taken on by a staff member, and they then get professional assistance in how to actually be a really good corporate secretary. If you don't have staff, it doesn't matter. Whoever you appoint as the corporate or the company secretary should actually upskill themselves with support from the board on how to do this.
Yes, definitely. And I think grabbing onto that item that you discussed of that link between your executive team and your board does really flow into the second aspect of the board meeting life cycle. And again, the intentionality behind the use of that word life cycle, your corporate secretary doesn't jump in when it's up to meeting minutes. Before your board meeting, they should be talking with your executive team, building your board packs, talking in with the board about agenda items that they would like to review and discuss, and ensuring that the board members are receiving board packs that are readable, that are relevant to what you're going to be talking about, and also that they are able to really interact and engage with those resources. I know Board Pro have really great features around your board packs that you can actually write notes on them. You can highlight different aspects. And I think that that is really essential for good board meeting prep, that actually your secretary is enabling you to be able to interact and engage with your board pack as such. During your meetings, obviously, taking your minutes, noting key decisions, actions, and the minutes as a whole. And then post-meeting, sending out your minutes, ensuring that you have documented them correctly and accurately for future reference, following up actions and sending reminders around that. And again, Board Pro have some really great reminders in that system. And then also communicating with the board and executive team of how that meeting will flow into your next one, because it is a life cycle. It does come back around at our next meeting as well. And then just to round out these discussions, our policies and procedures. So this should never be a tick box item. Policies and procedures need to be readable, usable, and applicable to streamline and strengthen workflows. I know that sometimes as an organisation, when we are first establishing, we create a pack of policies and then we park them somewhere in our file server. It is really important that we are reviewing these on a systematic process, that we're ensuring they are remaining fit for purpose and relevant to the organisation as it currently is. And also recognising that governance documents do extend past policies. The secretary should also be overseeing and creating your key registers. I think Stephen mentioned before your conflict of interest. That should be a register that your secretary is regularly reviewing and updating. Your related parties, a very pertinent issue in the Australian not-for-profit landscape at the moment. Do you have a register around it? Other key governance items such as insurance, do you know what your director insurance is up to? So I think it's really important that the policies and procedures is a key item that your secretary is undertaking and managing to ensure regular reviews. Stephen and Gordon, do you have any other risks that you have seen where this role is not prioritised?
And also around conflict of interest management, one of the not-for-profits that I'm involved in is there's a register of conflicts, but at each meeting,
yes,
there's a review of all of the agenda items to ascertain if there's a specific conflict for the specific meeting, which is really quite handy to remind trustees and directors of that organisation that is there any potential conflicts during the meeting
Yes.
that are outside of the standard conflict
Yes.
register. So it's just a really good tip to get people focused on managing the conflicts.
Yes, and I think
Just-
again, making it that regular conversation that you're having and constantly coming back to it to put it at the forefront of people's minds.
And just one good last tip before you finish up, Anna, and that is it's always useful to actually have some anecdotes or vignettes of previous conflicts and how we dealt with them, so that when a new director comes on, there's actually a context around it. So having not only a register of interest, but some little stories about here are some conflicts in the past, here's how we dealt with those conflicts, so people can contextualize what it's about.
Yes, definitely. And I think it's again that why behind the what. So it is really essential that we are equipping people with the knowledge of why it is so important. Yeah, perfect. So in reviewing this function, I am very excited to announce the launch of the Breakthrough Office's Corporate Secretarial Service offering. So this service offering is a standalone offering that we have created in recognition of a not-for-profit specific corporate sec role. So the key reason behind creating this role is in identifying the broad scope and responsibilities of the corporate secretary beyond that of a minute taker. We know that resources are limited in the not-for-profit space, and often key personnel are role sharing to fill the corporate secretary position. However, as recognized, the secretary position is fundamental to success and viability of the organization and should be prioritized as such. So if you would like to discuss this further, please reach out to me after this webinar. But I want to again note that this has been a very fulsome topic today. We have had some incredible insight from our panelists, but I do know that there are a lot of further conversations that should flow from today. So I again encourage you to be reflecting on our items discussed and taking key questions back to your board and key personnel on what we can be doing to further upskill ourselves, further our knowledge and work in this area, and also ensure long-term success for our not-for-profit. I hope each of you are feeling more confident and equipped within this space. I do want to thank you for your time today, for our incredible panelists and the interesting questions that they answered and also raised. And then also to Board Pro for the behind the scenes work on this webinar. I'm so grateful to you, Sean, and your team for allowing us to have this conversation today. So thank you. I'll hand back to you, Sean.